Please join me in welcoming Richie and Krist Novoselic.
How did I get involved in election reform? So coming out of the music industry, music scene, and it was through music. I got politically involved in Washington State. There were bands like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden. Were just taking the world by storm, like 1992, 1991. And at the same time, the Washington State legislature had this like censorship bill. It was really bad. And city of Seattle had this teen dance ordinance. So if you were like an adult between the ages of 18 and 20, you couldn't go see Mudhoney play the Central Tavern because of the rules. And so it's like Seattle music was being celebrated internationally, but here in our own backyard, we were getting repressed. And so I got involved with other people in the music community, and we're proactive about, hey, this is a good thing, and you should really foster and encourage it. And we started to turn things around, where music's now celebrated in Seattle and Washington State. But it wasn't easy. One of the things, personally, was that's how I got my civic education. Like, how does a bill work? You know, I'm just a bill. Remember the cartoon or whatever, which has a cool bass line on it. And and not just that civics, but like the whole process. Like, all right, the bill and your law, this and that. But there's all these like interests at work, legislation, the music community, beer distributors, fans, people, record stores, you know, and people coming together and just engaging the system. And there was a lot of enthusiasm, like, hey, we're going to have a concert. Are you going to come down? Like, absolutely, I want to be part of the concert because it's an event for our political goals, like a benefit concert. And then, are you going to come to the public hearing? Yeah, we're going to be there. We're going to testify for better laws. And then, like, are you going to vote? It's like, no, not really. Like, why not? It's just like, well, I just don't feel like my vote matters. And, you know, and part of that education was, well, really, it kind of doesn't really matter, does it? Because we have this representative here in Seattle, she's great. But if there's like 100% turnout for her, does it really matter? Because she's gonna win anyway, okay? And then this other person who's against us, like he's really bad and he's out to get us, but he's in a safe seat, Krist. I don't think you can really do anything about him. It's like, really, what do you mean safe seat? Well, this is how it works, and this is not like, geez, there's got to be a better system than that. It's like, yeah, well, you know, so at the time, this was about 1995, I'm on the internet. I think I had the 110 version, 256Ks they put together, ISDN line or something like that it was called. Do you remember that? Anyway, so I was like faster than all my neighbors and anything. So like and I was on this search engine called Alta Vista. And then I'd plug in keywords, election reform, elections, voting in the United States. And this one group would come up, FairVote, Center for Voting and Democracy. Like, well, that's interesting. And who's their chairman? John B. Anderson. And I remember him, he ran for president in 1980 as an independent. And he had this iconic campaign. He was running neck and neck with the Democrat and the Republicans that summer, 1980, during the campaign. It was this really disruptive, he went what's the word I'm looking for? Viral. He went viral. He caught all this imagination. So
Doonesbury.
What's that?
Doonesbury liked him.
Doonesbury liked him. So it's just like, well, he's independent. Well, I come from the independent music scene, okay? And so then FairVote like has this what is ranked choice voting? You know, this known instant runoff voting. You like rank these candidates, proportional representation for the United States. We can do that in America. Okay, it's like they call it the alternative vote. This ranked choice voting, like, oh well, alternative music is what I come out. So it was all kind of interesting, and so I looked into it and I became fascinated because it just seems so like cutting edge and so transformative. And you know, with Nirvana and the music scene that we came out of, it seemed like most rock music was really lame in the 1980s. This kind of predictable 70s kind of rehash into the 80s, And then, so we came out of this music scene that kind of revolutionized the whole thing. And so there was this whole new wave of music that came in, grunge rock, alternative, whatever. And so it seemed like the same sensibility, like, well, how do we do with our elections and votings? Like maybe we can have this new kind of wave of democracy take over. And again, doing those word searches is just like, well, we have proportional representation in the United States. Wow, isn't that like how they vote in Europe? And it's like, no, it's kind of like it, because it's not winner take all. It's not where you have like one district where everybody votes and whoever gets the most votes represents 100% of the district. With proportional representation, you have multi-winners, and it's not a winner take all system. So you can have a district with three people who represent everybody. So it's like a slice of a pie, like. Everybody gets their share of the vote, like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So, but in Europe, wow, in Europe they vote for parties. They don't even vote for people. Is that really a good idea? Maybe. I don't know. In Europe, it takes like 2, 3, 4% of the vote to get elected. I don't know if that would be very popular here in the United States. So looking into the FairVote website, reading scholarly papers, and it's like there's American versions of proportional representation. So they're candidate based. So you vote for the person. You don't vote for a party. The thresholds to get elected are a lot higher. And there's versions that are used to this day in the United States. 100 municipalities in the United States use some version of proportional representation. And it's like it could take 33% of the vote to get elected. So, or 25%, or 20%, or 15. Okay, that's like really, but it's a lot higher than say like in Israel, they just raised it up to what, 3.5%, 4%, something like that. Okay, so there's these American versions of proportional representation, and I thought that would be very, very transformative. Like, wow, we could have, you feel like your vote would matter. You could be like a Democrat in a rural area, and you could actually vote for and elect somebody. Where I live, Democrats. I'm an independent, by the way, but where I live, Democrats they pull in about 43% of the vote on the coast of Washington State, and they elect nobody. So all these voters, and then the Republicans, she wins every couple years automatically. And then the Democrats don't put any money. The Democratic leader here in San Francisco, she doesn't put any of those millions of dollars that they collect selling access to the Congress. They don't put any money. They just wrote that off. Those Democrats are orphan voters. Okay? But then on the other hand, you have Democrats in Seattle. And it was the same thing. It's just like, well, if you have 100%, they have like 70% turnout for Democrats there, and there's all this surplus votes, and it doesn't really add up. And then there's Republicans in Seattle; they get nothing, okay. But we're all taxpayers. We're all subject to the rules and laws of the land, and so somehow there's this current system, this winner-take-all system with single-member districts. It decides who the winners and the losers are. We have an independent commission to pick our to draw districts in Washington State, and it's just like they decide who the winners and losers are. It's not even an independent commission; it's a bipartisan commission where the Democrats and Republicans collude. And they say, you're going to be the winner, you're going to be the loser to the voters. In California, you have a commission now. It was the first time you used it was in like 2011. And that was way better than what you had before. But then wasn't a DOS system better than like I don't know, what was before that? Punch cards? You know what I mean? Following me? And so there's this commission, like you've got an independent commission. We took it out of the hands of politicians and we gave the choice for voters to, the commission decides who wins and who loses, okay? So back to, so proportional representation is, we decide who votes, okay? So that's how I got, I just felt it was really, it's just a way better system, and so people aren't really like plugged in I guess it's really new to a lot of people, but I got involved in with FairVote, and so we work a lot with like the Voting Rights Act, and they're here in Santa Clara. There's going to be an initiative on the ballot to change the proportional representation as a remedy to the Voting Rights Act, and a lot of people don't know. They'll assume that the Voting Rights Act doesn't say anything about having these single-member district elections as being the remedy. And there's actually, that's where you find proportional representation in case law in the United States is coming out of the Voting Rights Act, because it gives minorities a voice. So it facilitates minority representation. It's just that simple. So if you're a political minority, say a Republican in this Democratic town, you could possibly elect somebody on your council. You're a racial minority, absolutely. You could elect somebody if the people of that race are like-minded enough to elect somebody. Okay, so but it doesn't assume that when you put districts together, it's just like with the district elections, that assumes that people are going to be like, well, you're Latino and you're going to vote Democrat, or you're Black, you're going to vote Democrat, okay? Which is, fine, but it doesn't make that the proportional representation doesn't necessarily make that assumption. It lets the voters decide, and so that's basically my stake in this, and why I'm such a forceful advocate for it, because we're taxpayers. We're subject to the rules and the laws of the land, and we should decide who we elect. Instead, we have political insiders, the same people who sell access to Sacramento or Olympia or Salem or whatever the state house is, or the US Congress, okay? Those same people, those are the today's boss. Those are the people who are also making decisions on the most fundamental part of our democracy, the interface between the citizen and government. And they're saying, here's this system. It's the winner-take-all single-member system. And this is how it works. We draw these districts, and then you vote. And then we make sure that this district is safe for Democrats. We make sure that this district's safe for Republicans, and maybe there's a few toss-up districts in between. And I think we can do a lot better than that, especially in the 21st century. Like, everybody's really concerned about gerrymandering. And if you want a solution for gerrymandering, absolutely. Let's have independent commissions. But that's just part of the deal. Voters need to have a say ultimately on who represents us. And that's what proportional representation is. There's an American versions of it. They're constitutionally protected. They've been scrutinized by the courts, and they're in use in the United States. It's that simple. So how am I on time here? 12:20, so I guess we can move on.
Okay.
And then we'll do the Q&A, then you can really kind of give it to me, so.
All right. Hey, thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
So, great to be here. Thanks, Martin, wherever you are. Oh, there you are. I guess right next to me. And the Bright Spots collection, which has sort of been exciting for us. I have been doing this for a long time. Every year, I think progress has been made in a way that felt good in our year-end letter to supporters. But certainly the last few years, sort of things took off in a certain kind of way. We got a big statewide win that I'll talk about for ranked choice voting. We quintupled our members in the last 18 months. And we've got people like the Bright Spots Collective and others, Bain Capital, a collection of people, and some lawyers saying, how can we help? And so people are trying to sort of do things too. And it's a climate which I think speaks to some kind of people's concerns about the specific outcome of 2016 and how it happened. But I think also just this climate of feeling that our democracy is really in a state of crisis. And I think that's sort of stepping back from the point about how we can change our systems from winner-take-all to a proportional system. We need to. We're in a sort of state of crisis that I think is in a cycle that isn't going to get better without intervention. And I think that's what I sort of want to walk through, and then why we think ranked choice voting specifically is a wedge into that. Not the only one. There's a lot of other great work being done, but one that we think is fundamentally important. So sort of getting back to first principles, the vote is this quietly radical concept, right? It hasn't been part of human history. I mean, I'm sure people voted in certain family groups and so on, but for like government, deciding the consent of the governed and letting people cast an equal vote based on just being a human being is a pretty radical concept. And of course, because of that, had its people who are worried about it, and those who are in power not necessarily embracing the power that essentially they're turning over to people. And some of the rules that have developed over time have been quite intentionally kind of crafted in ways that I think minimize or miniaturize the power of our vote. Some are just that when we started voting, this technology and this understanding of what options we had was different. In a country like the United States, which has been around for a while, wasn't aware of some of the options. And Chris talked about some of these uses of proportional systems down at the local level, but higher up, we've settled into kind of institutional inertia and a false belief that it's always been that way, or it has to be that way. Or James Madison, wrote in stone that thou shalt do it this way, which is actually not true at all. The U.S. Constitution is a blank slate about voting. It's actually something that we are designed to really be doing creative and innovative things in states and having it go up, and yet we get we get this sort of stalled political class that in fact has an interest in keeping it the way it is. People don't know much about options; they're sort of distracted by other things, and we muddle along and the U.S. economy works and things, but at a certain point, actually the policymakers really matter and government really matters. And right now it's in a mode of deep challenges. And I think this work is monumentally important. Two ways that the vote is sort of transparently restricted in ways that we're going to get into today is one is we get to indicate one preference. Most of our elections, you get to just vote for one person, right? That's it. So if you have two choices and you get to vote for one of them, you have magnificently indicated a preference that sort of fully says, I like this person more than the other person. And you add up the votes and one person gets more of them, and then you have a winner, unless you're using the Electoral College. But if you have more than two people, you're only voting for one and you've said nothing about the other two. If you have 5 people, you vote for one and you're not saying about the other 4, you're starting to actually not allow people to indicate preferences that in fact might be quite significant and important to know. And we can. It's just a simple matter of asking voters to reveal opinions they have and then using that information to actually get better outcomes. And that's really the idea of ranked choice voting. And we'll get into that in a moment. And then the second part of that, or the second major restriction, is one that Chris was getting into, which is that we are accepting the sort of geographic tyranny that where you live determines your representation, and everyone who lives in a particular place should have one representative, even if they have very different views. And we don't really organize ourselves necessarily by geography in the way we think and the way we certainly think about politics. In the way we might want to organize ourselves and put forth a representative, but we have one person per area. And that's a major restriction that, as Chris was saying, 51% represents 100%. And kind of imagine an economic environment where the only way you can make money is if you're the actual biggest, and if you sort of have a new idea, you don't get any reward for it until you're actually the biggest in the industry. That would be sort of stifling for what's possible. And that's the restriction of the single-member district system. Neither of these are in the Constitution. All of these can be changed, and all of them actually have a lot of history of being worked on. So for expanding preferences, the model that we've settled on, and I think for good reason, is ranked choice voting. So who comes into the room when we talked at the start? Some people seem to know something about it, but who knows something about instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting, just a show of hands. So in this system, rather than just vote for one person, if you got this multi-candidate situation, you get to say, oh, here's my first choice, but okay, there's these other candidates, here's my second choice, and here's my third choice. Santa Fe, New Mexico just used ranked choice voting for mayor for the first time on Tuesday. They had 5 candidates run, and they had this very sort of respectful, substantive, civil campaign. Voters went in and overwhelmingly ranked a lot of the candidates, first choice, second choice, third choice. And the reason that they had gotten interested in this system is they'd had a whole string of mayors who didn't win more than half the votes. So when you have multiple candidates, right, when you add up all the votes, someone might have 39% or 32% or whatever it might be. And there's a belief, and rightly so, that might not actually be the person who's winning just happens to be at the top of the heap, but in fact could lose one-on-one to someone else. And in fact isn't the one who really would have won if only those 2 people had run. So the idea of a ranked choice system is to use that added information to determine who is really the most representative candidate. And the way that we've seen this work, and we see this work a lot, like the Oscars just picks Best Picture with ranked choice voting. The biggest conservative party in Canada is using ranked choice voting right now to pick their leader in the most populous province, and they did it last year nationally. Same in country of New Zealand last week. We're sort of seeing a lot of uses of this system. It sort of works, and it works psychologically because, one, people often have preferences. If you go into an ice cream store and you want, chocolate and they don't have it, you usually know what else to ask for, and then you get it and you can feel somewhat happy even though you don't get your chocolate. Strawberry. Vanilla bean. And the logic of the system kind of makes sense. So you just drop last person out. So you add up all those first choices, and if you've got someone who has a majority in this system, you're done, right? Because you're just trying to get a majority winner, which is more than half. If you don't, the candidate in last place loses. You look at their ballots. Those people have indicated preferences. You add them to your next choice, to each voter's next choice. You see if you get a majority winner. You keep going until you get a majority winner. It makes sense in a lot of the elections that we have. So like the 2016 presidential race, right? So the general election had 2 major candidates, but then some interesting other candidates. Like Gary Johnson was Libertarian nominee. Jill Stein was the Green Party nominee. There were some other people as well. And actually, most of the big swing states were not won with a majority, like Michigan and Wisconsin and so on. And so in those states, if we'd had this system, we said, okay, it's not over yet because the people who voted for Stein and Johnson and others could have indicated a second or third choice. And you look at those ballots and then you add them to whoever is next. And you would have had an instant runoff. You would have had this head-to-head comparison. And this whole kind of poisonous climate of like, oh, why are these third parties running, goes away. And you actually might get a more legitimate outcome that people can say is acceptable. It's interesting, there's been a lot of talk about the Russian hacking that happened, and we're hearing a lot about that, obviously. It doesn't seem like they actually hacked into any machines, but they hacked our plurality system. We absolutely know they did that because they did all this sort of Facebook ads to like promote third-party candidates and try to sort of disrupt. Our system is vulnerable to a certain kind of activity because it's not a very good system, right? So that they could drive certain people to vote for a minor party candidate, they knew that wouldn't help the minor party candidate win, and it might change the outcome of the major party race. Ranked choice voting would kind of deal with at least that kind of hacking, but it does a lot more to it as well. So back in Santa Fe, it's sort of an interesting history of a city that has a lot of sort of, local politics that get pretty negative and poisonous, and it's got a kind of an interesting Anglo-white divide and longer-term Santa Feans and newcomers, and there's some tensions and things. This was a fascinating campaign for all the people you talked to. They had the most debates they'd ever had, and respectful civil debates. So why might that be? If you sort of think about the system, if I'm trying to win, and I'm pretty darn sure I'm not going to get more than half of first choices, I know I'm going to need to be some people's second choices, the backers of other people. That means 2 things. I need to learn about what other candidates are saying to kind of understand how I can appeal to their voters. And I just am going to talk to more people. I mean, the thing you hear over and over, particularly at that level, is that you're walking through a neighborhood and there's a yard sign for someone else. And in the old system, you walk by it and say, I'm not going to waste my time there. With ranked choice voting, you go in and you have a dialogue and you hope to be their second choice. And who knows, you might persuade them to be a first choice. So there's sort of an extension of the dialogue. And so when the winner comes in, you can't guarantee someone's going to be a good mayor, but this person has a lot of tools now because actually the guy who won went from 39% to 66% during the count at the final round, meaning that he really did learn about a lot of other people. He really was good at getting second and third choices. He has a lot more to work with, and let's see what he does, right? But a system can actually really change the rewards of how to be a good representative. And I think fundamentally, we're at a point in our politics where the politics of two and kind of the limitations of that are increasingly disconnected from how we think about the world and how particularly I think younger people think about choices. And I grew up where there were still 3 networks and PBS and UHF, and that was it or something, right? But my kids don't think that way. And and yet in politics we're sort of supposed to be sort of satisfied with that, even though we know it's not delivering actually particularly good choices, and it's creating incentives to act in ways that in fact aren't very good. And it's just a matter of a statutory change that we can do. Any state can change how we vote for president, US Senate, US House, on down, on their own. And state of Maine, is there any Mainers here? Probably not. But Maine is going to use ranked choice voting in June for all their big primaries. And they're also going to vote on keeping ranked choice voting, which we think they will. And if they do, then they'll use it for US Senate and US House in November. They didn't actually try to pass it for president. That's a future thing that they can do, but they could have. But the way our system works, actually states have a lot of leeway to kind of lead in democratic practice, and that's been our sort of whole history. We started with incredible limits on suffrage, and many states didn't vote for president, and so on. And then we keep learning, expanding, and states pushing the edges of the envelope. Women's suffrage didn't kind of magically start with a constitutional amendment. It started with states using it and cities using it, and that's what we're seeing with ranked choice voting. And I think it's, I believe, kind of an inevitable conversation for us to have, because I think the kind of that binary choice is just not going to work sort of going forward. And the restlessness that voters are going to feel is going to create more and more tensions with the system. And it doesn't mean that the major parties are bad. It just means that they need to be accountable. And they can't just be there because they're there. And they can't use the rules and tools they have to keep themselves entrenched, which is essentially what we've allowed to happen. We allow the major parties in their campaigns to kind of run as political actors, and then they win, and then their legislators making policy determining the rules of the game that they run in, right? It's sort of an intrinsic problem to just kind of turn that over. And when we think of politics being broken, it really, in a sense, is actually working just as you might imagine it would if you let that happen. And I think that we really can't keep letting that happen. So I think Chris touched well on the part of what it means to go from a single member district to a multi-member district, but I'll use a kind of a specific example. There's sort of this other sort of fundamental way that our vote, I think, is limited, is when we vote for the US House, we vote in single member districts by statute, right? Actually, that's a congressional statute from the 1960s where they've required every state to use single member districts. And we had states at that time that didn't. In essentially saying every state that has more than one seat needs to draw districts. And once you start drawing districts, it's usually sort of a self-interested process. But even when it's not, like in California, just geographically, you have partisan imbalances. States, we don't redraw state lines. Maybe we should, but we don't. And so, we all know which states are red and which states are blue and which states are swing, and it's actually very entrenched, and there's fewer swing states than there used to be. In counties, we don't redraw county lines. The average county was won by 15% in 1996. It was won by more than 40% in the presidential race in 2016. The median county was won by more than 70 to 30, right? So you put a bunch of counties together and you do not have a competitive district. I'm sorry, right? And so it's super easy to know who's going to win almost, more than 90% of congressional races. And if you live in one of those, binary choice, stuck on one side, your interest maybe in the 2018 election is how can I channel money and volunteer time in that like Nevada 3 or something like, whatever, or some other particular district, probably not where you live. There's a bill in Congress. Ro Khanna is actually one of the sponsors of it, the congressman from around here. And it would be to, by statute, actually take the logic of the 1960s bill, which required single-member districts, and instead require multi-member districts with ranked choice voting. When you use ranked choice voting in a multi-member district, you get those virtues of the ranked choice system as used in Maine and Santa Fe and such places. But you also can expand who gets to help elect someone, because each seat can be won with a smaller share of votes, and then collectively, almost everyone gets to help elect someone. So you really expand that kind of voter power that way, which is why it's such a good tool for the Voting Rights Act. So this isn't just theoretical for us, and I think that it's this time of opportunity. I've been doing this for a while, but I think this sort of moment of disruption, which we're experiencing in our politics in multiple ways, and it's not just about Donald Trump. It's about like there's a series of things that are kind of our politics isn't working that really are sort of deeply troubling to more and more people. And again, I don't think it's self-correcting. There's a really good book, or it's a paper that I wanted to draw people's attention to. Michael Porter, this Harvard Business School sort of icon, wrote with Catherine Gell called "Why Competition in the Political Industry is Failing America." It really lays out where we are, I think, very well. I don't agree with all the prescriptions they have, but I do like that ranked choice voting is among them. But that essentially they lay out the challenges we face and the fact that we do have the power to change things. And I think if we don't, we're really, things are not going to get better magically. I think some of the deep divisions we have that kind of combined with winner take all are highly problematic. And we're in a cycle where this kind of change has to happen. And I think all of the other changes in our society too, the Me Too movement is partly about like women having a seat at the table. Women are still, there's 5 women governors, there's 80% of Congress is 4 out of 5 are men still. For Republicans, it's more than 9 out of 10. And at a certain point, that's just not going to work. And how can we kind of unloose this system? And actually, one of the outcomes of the Fair Representation Act would be a very likely rapid rise in the number of women who are winning, a fluid way for our racial and ethnic diversity to win. And one of these things, is anyone from Santa Clara? Just curious. Yay. So Santa Clara is voting on ranked choice voting, the multi-member style, and ranked choice voting for mayor in June. But there's a whole bunch of cities in California that are addressing the fact that they're not very representative in their local governments. Santa Clara has an all-white city council in a city that's majority-minority. And you're seeing that in a lot of places. And the push is to have them go to single-member districts. Go from at-large elections where they get to vote citywide and then vote in each single-member district. But we don't necessarily live that way. Like, we don't necessarily live in our little pockets of racial difference. And there's some things that maybe a single-member district does, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to kind of fluidly determine your own representation every election. And that's a really important conversation we should be having, and California is actually just doing this without the conversation really happening much. But Santa Clara is going to allow us to have that conversation, so we're really excited about that campaign. We're also seeing, I think, a realization that it can work at a higher level. So this Maine situation was interesting. I don't know how many of you have heard of Paul LePage. He's the governor of Maine, pretty controversial guy. Sort of brags that he was sort of Donald Trump before Donald Trump was. But he's part of a whole string of governors who didn't win half the votes. In fact, didn't win even 40% of the votes when they won. The last 3 governors of Maine all won with less than 40. So it's a state that's kind of ahead of the curve as far as having independents and third parties doing pretty well. And it creates this tension of like split votes and spoilers and people saying you shouldn't vote for the third party candidate, but people still doing it, and sort of controversial outcomes. And Maine responded to that by passing ranked choice voting in 2016 with the second highest vote total that ever had been passed in a ballot measure. And then, speaking of the challenges of sort of changing things, we've had to sort of deal with legal issues, there's sort of election administration challenges, and won't go to the whole story, but they basically repealed it last fall, finally, in this brinksmanship that one of the parties was playing. And then, but in Maine, you can do a referendum. You can actually say, no, let's not accept that law.
Even used.
Yeah. So they've collected the signatures to force a referendum in June on it. So they're going to vote in June on whether to keep it. And while they're doing that, they're going to get to vote with it in these races for governor, where they got 10 Democrats running and like 5 Republicans running, and those people will run with ranked choice voting. So that's has a potential to be a really big breakthrough. And we're seeing more states where that can happen. Just yesterday, the radical bastion of Utah just passed ranked choice voting as a city option with a really explicit understanding that they want to try it out at a city level to see if it's ready to work in Utah at a higher level. It's just fun to see this moving in different ways in different places, and more groups getting involved, and more and more state groups forming. And I think we're sort of entering this sort of different phase. One thing I just wanted to highlight as a possibility is we'll see what happens, but the 2020 presidential race is looming, and almost certainly we'll again have some third-party and independent energy. We'll see. Who knows on which side, right? John Kasich is saying that maybe he won't run as, who knows what he'll do, but he sort of said it's time for a multi-party system. Does he run on that side of the spectrum? Do we see a kind of a Bernie Sanders force run on the left? We'll have to see, but our sort of politics is in this tense mode, and some states could use ranked choice voting. So we're going to elevate the goal of trying to do that at least in a couple states to show that that's possible. And then the presidential primaries will be really interesting. The Republicans had a lot of people running, and I think that part of what Donald Trump was able to do was dominate the media cycle and kind of be the plurality guy. And actually all his wins up until really late in the process were by plurality, not by majority. And if he'd had to win majorities earlier, I think it might have, who knows how that might have affected how he campaigned and maybe ultimately how he governs today. But Democrats face that same dynamic in 2020. Is it just a race to 25%? And what does that mean for the way you behave and the way you try to kind of bring people together? And you can change those rules, like Iowa caucuses could change that simple party rule, right? It's very straightforward to change ranked choice voting. So we're going to try to look into that idea too. And the Fair Representation Act is not going to pass this Congress, but it does have several co-sponsors. And I think, when you're having dialogues about gerrymandering, about wouldn't it be great if we had a competitive race where we live, or wouldn't it be great if we had more diversity of representation, or I'm a Republican in the Bay Area, or I'm a Democrat in Oklahoma, or I'm a pro-life Democrat, or whatever it might be, a pro-choice Republican. There should be more space for more of us, and we have a system that really makes it hard for these different perspectives to be elected, and realize that that's an answer just sitting there that we can keep building support for. And we have some ideas about how that might happen, but Santa Clara is a place where that can start. Yeah, so let me just finish with before we do that, with two things that I wanted to do. So one is to talk about the ways that people can help. So one is that there are these efforts going on, and there's lots of growing numbers of state groups. So for people who are interested in donating to things, there's lots of ways to help that, including the Santa Clara effort. But also we have been intrigued by the way that people have stepped forward to help. So Lewis is part of a group that has taken on sort of a frustrating challenge that's really been a barrier to us over the years, which is the ranked choice voting has often made sense to policymakers in particular settings, and then they turn and they find out that their voting equipment can't do it. The whole way we vote, not what we vote on. I mean, it's funny when you're on a place like Google where you're so sort of far ahead of the curve on doing things, and the way we vote is just pathetically antiquated and poorly administered, and including most of the counties around here. Like San Francisco and Oakland use these more than decade-old systems that would essentially be like using the phones we had 15 years ago and saying like, that's cool, that's really cutting edge. And it really limits sort of what we can do. We actually have 4 cities in the Bay Area using ranked choice voting, but they do it in this sort of awkward ways tied to the voting equipment. That's San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco. And they stepped forward and have been working with some folks that we knew to create like a universal tabulator to be able to work with legacy voting equipment and essentially make it much easier for some state like Missouri or something that gets interested in ranked choice voting to be able to work with this sort of widget, or it's more complicated than that, to be able to have a federally approved, tested, certified system to be able in a secure way use ranked choice voting on the older voting equipment, aggregate data from different systems, and kind of get past that puzzle. The next round of new machines are going to get better and better on this, and they're certainly not rocket science, but it's been incredibly helpful and will almost certainly sort of open the door toward more things going on. We have a tool, rankit.vote. I was going to show it to you, but I'll just sort of tell it, which is that, so rankit.vote is a way to just vote with ranked choice voting and create a quick poll and share with your friends and so on. But I would imagine Google Vote or something, right? Where just sort of a great interface, right? Where you could go in, maybe choose your voting system. There's other voting systems too. We could get into that, but there's other ways to vote. But something where like people could make a quick decision about something, or an organization could do it. Like 60 colleges and universities, even more now, use ranked choice voting, all sort of figuring out how to do it. And if they could sort of had a nice sort of tool to kind of securely run ranked choice voting elections, that would be terrific. We also have, last thing I'll say is we have this tool, Monopoly Politics, where we project outcomes in congressional races and then show what would happen if like the two-party vote were like 53% to 47. What might that do for like kind of outcomes? And you can kind of put that number in. It's like a pretty good like Excel tool that we're showing on online that kind of shows it, which by the way shows if you put 53% in right now, you do not get actually, for the Democrats, you don't get a Democratic majority in the House. And you can sort of see why and which districts don't change. But we'd love to kind of make something like that really kind of inviting to play with. So there's lots of ways that we'd love to kind of work with people too. And let's turn to questions.
All right. All right, we're going to go to questions. There is a Dory. I'm going to see. This comes from Daryl Gove. Why not approval voting? Ranked choice voting seems like cognitive overhead for voters and complexity for counters. Approval seems easier and should bias towards candidates with broad appeal.
We're here to talk about ranked choice voting. You can read all about approval voting on the internet. So, yeah. I mean, we're here to talk about to talk about ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is in the law books. It's used internationally. It's used in the United States. Let's do the next question.
Yeah, no, I will just briefly mention that, Chris, just because it's an interesting topic. Like we're in a room of sort of people that think about technology and not being tied to what's been done. Ranked choice voting has been done much, much more than some of the other alternative systems that are kind of interesting to look at, like score voting and star voting and kind of approval voting, Condorcet voting. There's these sort of different ideas that are out there, and I think they all speak to certain virtues. One of the things that's interesting, though, sort of the challenge is a lot of them are sort of mathematically, technically sound, but sort of psychologically not. And let me just give a quick example of approval voting, which is why I think it is used so little in kind of competitive elections, is that if you think about, say, that Republican presidential field in 2016, with approval, you would say, oh, I like this person, I like this person, I like this person.
Approval voting is you get all the candidates, and you can just vote. You can vote for every one of them if you want.
Yeah.
Fill in this zero, it just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. So yeah.
It's just that's what it is.
So it's like if you're doing a doodle or something. Like, but here's the thing, is that when you're actually in the heat of the fray, it's really hard for candidates to say, yeah, go ahead and vote for my opponent with an equally cast vote that might help make me lose, right? And for voters to actually get in that frame too. So it's psychologically not as sound as the math. And that's where I think, but we're also going to say, hey, give it a try. It has very little use in practice. And ranked choice voting, we know works. That's the thing why I think what kind of Chris was saying, we know it works. We know that voters actually do it.
It's been scrutinized by the courts. And so if you want to advocate a voting system, you're going to come across a lot of opponents in the establishment. The insiders don't want change. And the first thing they do is they run to the law books. And they're going to sue you. And so with ranked choice voting is been scrutinized by the courts. The judges, it's constitutionally protected.
But we actually hope more places try out more systems, but I think we're pretty confident that ranked choice voting is ready to kind of go to the highest level right now.
What are your thoughts on Lawrence Lessig's one person, one vote, equal votes project? Will the lawsuits they're bringing to the Supreme Court help in your mission?
Do people know Lawrence Lessig? Kind of interesting guy. Did a lot of stuff on sort of internet freedom and was at Stanford, now is at Harvard. He's done some interesting stuff. We're actually going to be likely working with him on some stuff on our particular goals. One of the things he's trying to do is sort of take on the Electoral College as it currently is done in the winner-take-all rule, which is another statute. It's not in the Constitution or anything. So when candidates win a state, they get all the electoral votes in that state, kind of by winner-take-all. So if you win by 20%, you get all the electoral votes. If you win by 1 vote, you get all of the electoral votes. And his lawsuit is against that principle. We'll see. I think it's going to be a challenging legal theory to go deep into the courts. But I welcome the dialogue. We actually are not fans of the Electoral College system as it's currently constituted, and think that having a dialogue about it is good.
So I guess I sort of have 2 questions. The main one is, do we actually have data on how many people rank more than one candidate when they do ranked choice voting, or do a lot of them just still pull one person in? And if they aren't putting in a second person, like, is it because of lack of education about the other candidates? Is there a way to encourage people? Because that would be the biggest thing I would think would happen. People would be like, I don't know who these people are, and they just wouldn't even bother.
Right. Well, it's an interesting question. So the more interested they are in the race, the more they'll rank everybody, right? So just as an example, we did a poll in the Republican presidential field at the time of the Iowa caucuses of real likely Republican voters. It was an online poll with YouGov, so pretty nice sort of way to be able to show your preferences. Did not say rank everybody, but it offered them the chance to, and more than 90% ranked them all.
How many people ranked in Santa Fe last week?
And Santa Fe, exactly. We don't actually have the full data yet, but Santa Fe, first time use of it. Nice one is they're getting better ballot designs. Like, I don't know, do some of you vote in San Francisco or Oakland, so they have ranked choice voting. We're generally, like in the mayor's race, a majority of people use all the rankings allowed, which is 3. Majority of people will do that for mayor. They're not allowed to do more than 3 in the current ballot design. And then if it's like a lower level Board of Supervisors race, a majority will definitely rank more than 1, but not as many. And so, the less you know about the candidates, the more you won't do it. But in the Santa Fe race, so 5 candidates that went all the way through down to 2. When they got to the final round, of all the people that voted in the first round, 96% had made a preference between the final 2. It's kind of cool. It's a pretty diverse city with a lot of differences, but people had learned about the candidates and wanted to indicate a preference. The other part of it is that now you have candidates who, you're saying like, oh, I don't know who these candidates are. The candidates know you might fully think that. They have a reason to engage with you. So what you're starting to see is the best. People are starting to get the playbook of how to win with ranked choice voting, and the playbook is talk to more people, which is actually kind of a good thing, particularly at the local level. So like Minneapolis and St. Paul or places like that are using ranked choice voting, and you're just seeing deeper levels of kind of conversations going on.
What are the biggest obstacles to getting ranked choice voting to be more prevalent? Do you see a lot of opposition from the main 2 political parties?
You can. You think there would be more? There's opposition because, you bring change, and there's a survival instinct of, say, a politician or a lawmaker say, well, how is this going to affect my election? And you saw it in the presidential debates in 2016. It's just like, why didn't we have more people up there instead of the Republican and the Democrat? Because they didn't want to have any competition. And so things are so polarized now. It's like people are just afraid of the other side, and they're so afraid, or they demonize the other side, and they're so afraid. They don't have like the mental bandwidth, the cognitive ability to just say, well, maybe I should go for this independent or another voice, because they're afraid that they're going to help the other side. And so you just have the wagons are circled on both sides. And so with like ranked choice voting, it's very powerful. It's just like you have your first choice is your strongest choice. I really, really like her, and I'm going to make her my first choice. But, she's all right. I'm comfortable with making her my second choice, but that second choice is not hurting your first choice. It's just, it's a sophisticated way of like ranking your candidates. And, and people are so polarized now in the tribal with the Republicans and the Democrats. And it just seems like whatever the issues are running in the news And then why don't you just look at your own election system in California? They just changed the rules. You're going to have your primary election in March. Okay, so all the candidates run for whatever state office in March, or Congress, or for U.S. Senate. And then the top two candidates, no matter if someone has a majority or not, they run again in November. That's like almost a whole year of just getting stuck with two candidates. I mean, why did the legislature do that? That's a big deal. In France, they have runoff elections, and if someone wins in France, they have an election for their assembly. If someone wins a majority in that district, they're elected. If there's no majority, they have a runoff 2 weeks later. 2 weeks. And here it's just months. And then behind the scenes, you have all these insiders, I'm answering this question, like who's against it? Not just the political parties, okay, which are soft money conduits. They sell access to the legislature, to Congress, okay? Then they raise millions of dollars, and then they dole it out to who these bosses dole it out to who could win or lose. There's also these other groups that work behind the scenes that voters have no idea who they are. And their chamber of commerce or unions or identity politics groups or some issue groups on the left and right. And they're doing independent expenditures. They're spending millions of dollars. And, you know, it's like they don't want to change that power to give voters power. Why would they want to give voters power when they have the power? When you're stuck with two choices from March to November? That's what they want, because if you had more choices, you'd have more power. If you have more power, then they have less power. So that's why they're threatened. A lot of them are threatened. There's rational, good government folks in Sacramento and on the local level and in the Congress that recognize the value of this. But there's also a lot of people who don't want it because they don't want to give up their power.
Yeah, and I'll say, just to add just a tag to that, is that there's sort of an insider versus outsider. It's not left versus right, but it's often like a younger versus older. Some of our most passionate people, the guy we were working with in Utah, conservative Republican, he's like 29, and he's just like really into it. And you know, a guy in Georgia who's really into it is like 26, and you know, they don't have to be that young to be kind of like really leading the efforts, but they tend to be more ready. In 2008, when McCain and Obama ran against each other, they had both been prime sponsors or prime advocates of ranked choice voting. They were sort of a little bit of not outsiders, but kind of like change agents. And so you will see people like that who are more like that. And they're, you know, the current DNC chair likes ranked choice voting. A guy who finished second Republican race a few years ago was one of our key advocates. So there's sort of an interesting changes happening, and there is resistance, but I think a lot of those folks recognize it's not working that well either, and they can see that this is a way to let it breathe. I'll just say about top two and the point that Krist is making. So you all live in this sort of top two environment, which has some interesting aspects to it. So I don't want to be sort of just critical of it, but a part of it that's challenging is you only get to vote for one, right? And so in those primaries, the first round, you only get to vote for one. So like Republicans are worried they might not get someone advancing to the general election. And that's because there's more than one Republican running. If only one Republican ran for governor, they're pretty much a done deal that they get in. But it's a split vote, right? And Democrats are worried they might not actually get any in races that they otherwise could win in the congressional level because they have too many people running. And that's a product of like a system that just doesn't allow us to say more than we're able to.
Rob and Krist, thank you.